Hey everyone, welcome the Explainer. In our hyper-connected world, it's so easy to look at global events as these isolated things happening miles away. But here's the reality. A diplomatic summit, a shift in a shipping lane, or a drop in a distant market, those send massive shockwaves that eventually land right on our own front doorsteps. So today, we're unpacking the major developments from June 5th, 2026. We're going to literally break down how these seemingly random ripples crash into each other to shape our global reality.
I mean, it sounds like the setup to some wild puzzle, right? How exactly do drone strikes, a surprisingly hot jobs report, and a $30 million T-Rex all connect? Well, today we've pulled together 15 top headlines from around the globe, and by following the data and the events, we're going to see just how deeply intertwined they all really are.
Here's our roadmap for today. We'll kick things off with global conflicts and alliances. Then we'll move into market shocks and energy costs, take a focused look at Japan's historic policy pivots, and wrap it all up with science, arts, and society.
All right, let's jump straight into part one, global conflicts and alliances. Let's look at the major flashpoints popping off around the world right now.
So we're starting in the Middle East. Those freshly brokered peace talks are already showing some major structural cracks. Lebanese Parliament Speaker Nabi Berri has officially rejected the newly drafted ceasefire deal with Israel. So what's the hang-up here? Well, Berri argues the deal is fundamentally flawed. He says it doesn't guarantee a complete ceasefire, and it's missing a mandate for an immediate Israeli military withdrawal from southern Lebanon concurrent with any Hezbollah movement. It's a stark reminder of how incredibly tough the on-the-ground reality makes these diplomatic negotiations.
Now, while those immediate ceasefire talks are hitting roadblocks, there's a totally different, super high-stakes negotiation kicking off. The U.S. State Department and the Israeli Defense Ministry are talking about a massive, long-term security pact. Led by U.S. Ambassador Mike Huckabee and Israeli Defense Ministry Director General Amir Baram, this isn't just your standard aid package. They're looking to permanently integrate defense tech research, co-production pipelines, and even advanced military AI systems. It's literally a glimpse into the future of allied military infrastructure.
Shifting over to Asia, China's Xi Jinping is making some major diplomatic moves. Back in May, he held consecutive summits with both American and Russian leadership. Now, state media just confirmed Xi is heading to North Korea next week for a 2-day trip, invited by Kim Jong-un. Why is this such a big deal? Because it's Xi's first state visit there in 7 years. Timing this right after meeting with the US and Russia? Well, that signals some very significant strategic alignment moves in the region.
Meanwhile, the drone war between Ukraine and Russia is aggressively escalating, and it is having devastating localized impacts on maritime transport. An aggressive Ukrainian drone attack hit 2 commercial vessels right in Taganrog Bay in the Belgorod Oblast. Russian local reports confirmed a really tragic outcome. 5 Azerbaijani crew members were killed, and 3 others were severely injured. It's a sobering look at how the boundaries of this conflict are bleeding out into commercial waters.
And speaking of commercial waters, the Strait of Hormuz is a perfect example of how localized tension literally forces the whole world to change its behavior. After a bunch of missile and mine exchanges, the U.S. military has actually stepped back from public escort missions. Instead, they've shifted to quiet monitoring tactics. So now, commercial shippers are basically running in stealth mode. They're turning off their transponders and hugging the Omani coast just to avoid Iranian maritime checkpoints.
Let's transition to part 2, market shocks and energy costs. Because how are those geopolitical flashpoints we just talked about impacting us? They are violently crashing into global markets.
It all starts with this number right here, 172,000. That is the number of jobs U.S. employers added in May, according to the Labor Department. Now, normally you'd think, hey, job growth, that's great news. But actually, this was roughly double what economists expected. This incredibly hot labor market essentially tells Wall Street that near-term interest rate cuts from the Federal Reserve, yeah, those are probably off the table. For you and me, that means borrowing costs like mortgages, auto loans, and credit cards are going to stay expensive for a bit longer.
And man, that realization just sent markets tumbling. The Nasdaq slid 1.4%. The S&P dropped 0.7%, led by tech heavyweights like Nvidia and Broadcom. But the real devastation hit the Asian markets, driven by those fading rate cut hopes plus the broader geopolitical anxiety we just covered. Just look at South Korea's Kospi index. It plummeted a staggering 5.5% in a single session. Individual tech drops were brutal. Samsung Electronics down 6.4%, and SK Hynix dragged down nearly 10%.
This massive economic pressure is forcing governments to take drastic actions. Japan's finance ministry announced a record 5.6% drop in their foreign reserve assets in May, bringing it down to $1.31 trillion. That represents a plunge of $77 billion, which is the largest monthly drop in the nation's entire history. Tokyo's financial authorities are aggressively intervening, essentially burning through tens of billions of dollars to prop up the rapidly falling yen, just to shield their citizens from imported inflation.
Compounding all of these economic headaches are heavily elevated energy costs. US WTI is trading right around $93 a barrel, and Brent is hovering near $95. Why are they so expensive? It goes directly back to what we saw earlier with the Strait of Hormuz. Those silent defensive navigation tactics and persistent disruptions are choking global supply chains. And ultimately, that trickles down to higher costs when you fill up your gas tank or buy everyday goods.
To really grasp the long-term structural damage of these conflicts, listen to this warning from the Kuwait Petroleum Corporation. They said, even if peace agreements are finalized immediately, fully restoring normal domestic oil production lines could take upwards of 2 months. That's a huge takeaway. Geopolitical friction has a long, expensive tail. Turning the global supply chain back on is definitely not as simple as flipping a switch. Moving on to part 3, Japan's historic policy pivots. Let's look at Japan as a fascinating case study of a nation actively adjusting its very foundation just to survive these global pressures. All of this creates a really complex picture for the Japanese consumer right now. On the plus side, Japan reported its strongest streak of real wage growth in 5 years. April saw a 1.9% rise, making it the 4th consecutive month of positive wage expansion, their best trajectory since 2021. But there's a catch. Those rising Middle Eastern energy and import costs we were just looking at, they are threatening to completely swallow up these domestic consumer gains. So to combat this massive energy vulnerability, Japan's industry ministry just laid out a really aggressive, historic long-term energy plan. The goal here is to replace 2 to 5 aging nuclear reactors by the 2040s and a total of 11 to 14 by the 2050s. This is huge. For the very first time since the 2011 Fukushima disaster, Tokyo is setting explicit numerical replacement targets to secure investment and guarantee their future energy security. But the pivots aren't just about energy. Japan's ruling Liberal Democratic Party, along with 2 aligned opposition groups, just submitted a bill to overhaul their national law on referendums. By leveraging their massive parliamentary majority, this legislative maneuver lays the groundwork for a potential national vote to formally amend Japan's post-war pacifist constitution. It is a profound shift in national identity, completely driven by how complex today's world has become. All right, finally, part 4, Science, Arts, and Society. Let's take a quick breath, step away from the heavy geopolitical and economic data, and look at the human drama and history making the news. To wrap up this explainer, we're going to look at 3 totally different stories that give us a really fresh perspective on the day's events. We're looking at what's happening far above our heads and buried deep beneath the Earth. Up in orbit, aerospace engineers at NASA and Roscosmos are tracking a sudden technical incident aboard the International Space Station. It's a localized atmosphere leak. Now, the good news from Mission Control is that the crew remains entirely safe. Teams are scrambling right now to engineer a permanent patch for the affected module. It's a high-stakes problem, sure, but it is such a great example of international scientific cooperation happening in real time. Back down on Earth, the international entertainment community is in mourning today. Celebrated British screen and character actor James Handy was fatally stabbed in a shocking incident over in the UK. Local police have launched a high-priority murder investigation. It's just a really tragic loss of a beloved talent, and it's deeply saddened fans all over the world. And finally, we look to the distant past. Sotheby's just announced they will be putting one of the largest, most anatomically complete T-Rex fossils ever discovered up for public auction. This pristine specimen is projected to command a jaw-dropping final valuation of at least $30 million. Just incredible. You know, what's truly fascinating about this final story is the sheer perspective it offers us. We spend our days stressing over modern drone strikes, shifting political alliances, and wild market drops. And then a $30 million remnant of a creature that literally ruled this exact same planet millions of years ago surfaces. How does confronting deep history change your perspective on today's fleeting headlines? It's a fascinating question to chew on. Thank you so much for joining me to visually unpack today's complex world and keep seeking to understand the ripples around you.